He mentioned a very specific issue that we felt was super key for more senior candidates to be aware of, and that issue is downleveling. Hi, everyone, and welcome to another mock interview with Exponent. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're talking to Kevin, who used Exponent to land an IC7 or a Senior TPM role at Meta. IC7 for those who are familiar with the levels at Meta. He provided us with some great feedback that we really wanted to share with the broader audience because he mentioned a very specific issue that we felt was super key for more senior candidates to be aware of, and that issue is downleveling. With that, Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself and provide a little more context for the audience around what you saw during your prep and the actual interview itself?
Awesome. So sure, let me give a quick introduction to myself. So I'm Kevin. So prior to landing the role at Meta, I was actually working at Unity in the AI team on a lot of the 0 to 1 products in computer vision and simulation. And then prior to that, I've held a bunch of different product roles at companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Quantcast for those who are familiar, and Groupon in either monetization or demand generation, which is really both ad tech related fields on two different sides, one being the publisher or one being the advertiser space. So while my background is very product oriented, I actually ended up taking a role at Meta that was a product TPM, which is a bit of a shift. That said, regarding the question of downleveling, it's something that came across in my prep. And it was something that I was actually made intimately aware of because I was interviewing during a period when Meta had actually frozen all recs and they had actually just announced their first round of layoffs. So what was made very clear to me through the process was if I was assessed at a senior level, so an IC7 level or better, my offer I could go through. Anything below that, and I would be essentially blocked, which meant during the process, I had to pay really close attention to what downleveling was, what that meant, and talk to a lot of people to make sure that not only did I clear the bar from a technical or an answer perspective, I cleared the bar in a very senior level. And then the one thing that also came up during this process was I actually I did a lot of mock interviewing on Exponent, and I came across a bunch of guys who were in similar situations. But they unfortunately got downleveled and didn't get through because of the downleveling. And then the crazy part, and this is where the feedback came from to Exponent, was in talking with both of the candidates, it was actually clear that they were of the level. But when they told me the answers that they gave directly, it was immediately obvious. I'm like, okay, this is what you didn't do. And that was where all of this conversation came from. And this is sort of why we felt this is an important topic for candidates.
Got it. Let's start then with, can we talk about what downleveling is exactly?
So at its simplest, right, downlevel is just essentially being assessed at a level lower than you were interviewing for or being assessed at a level lower than you were hoping for. So this is the difference between being a senior or a non-senior or potentially even a senior in a director level role. It's a pretty big impact in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Okay. I've heard downleveling is also pretty common. So I made the transition from engineering to product manager, and I've heard a lot of internal candidates who are trying to do the same thing at Meta talk about that as well, that it's very common for people to get downleveled because it's a new role and people aren't really certain if you're going to be able to perform at the level that you currently are at. But there are ways around that, and that's what we want to talk about today.
Exactly.
Let's talk about why it happens and how people get down leveled during behavioral interviews specifically.
Yes, that's actually a key distinction, right? In every case, when the candidates that I was mocking with told me that they did not make bar or got down leveled, it was always in the behavioral sections. So that's, I think, a key distinction for folks. And the reason why this happens is it's because your interviewer is unsure of your seniority based on either the scale or the complexity of the projects or the magnitude of your impact in delivering those projects. And this happens most often because, we as individuals, we tend to undertell our story. And some people are more humble, which is great. And I think that's good. But we also leave out the key details that convey the magnitude of what you did because we're not thinking about it. We just answer the question as is. And we tend to answer the question very efficiently. But without providing those details, your interviewer, when they're asked, did they provide a problem at this level or better? They're going to be unsure. And I think the thing that I've clearly gone through in the Meta training is if you're unsure, the answer is no. And I think that's a very clear thing to call out for folks.
Yeah. So what are the impacts here of down leveling? Is it a big deal?
So in my case, they were huge because there's a difference between offer or no offer. But if you're not in that situation, and we're in much more normal times these days, what will happen is you'll get a lower level offer, which clearly will affect compensation. at Meta or at any other companies, I would say at the very least, it could easily cost you $50,000 to $100,000 in annual compensation, depending on levels. At higher levels, that number is going to be way bigger. So in the world of, if you're going to do the work to get the offer and go through the process, spend the extra time on this. This is probably the most value added incremental thing that you can do to ensure that you're A, going to be on a good ramp for your career, and B, you're not costing yourself like incrementally, like easily $50,000 to $100,000, I would say.
Yeah, that's a decent amount of money. So what are some tips and tricks to address these issues and to move around down leveling?
Yeah, so I think the real simple thing that we often miss is, I think you want to really talk about the level of the individual that you're working with, right? So there's a very big difference between I'm working with a senior manager or a director or a VP, right? That's a clear signal for your interviewer. The other part is when you talk about this, talk about the size of the project. It's very easy for someone to lose sight of whether this is a 10-person cross-functional effort or if it's a 500-person org and this is like the thing that they're working on, right? I think those are key. And then the other thing is, why is this project so important to the organization? Like if you're working on 0 to 1 projects, sometimes that's not a big deal. But when you talk about the 0 to 1 project and it's the core thing for this group that's funded at X amount, that is a very key distinction that you want to make, because that shows that you were viewed as an important individual and the individual to bring this forward, even though the total scope initial impact was small. So this is how you get around the point of view. Hey, we did a really good job. We delivered $1 million of revenue, and your interview candidate is going to be like, that's not that much. But if that's the first $1 million that you made, that's actually a big deal, right? So the key thing is be very specific, call out these details, and make it very easy for your interviewer to understand that you actually are very senior.
Yeah, that's great advice. I would love to see some of that advice in action. So I'm going to ask you a sample mock interview question, and I'd love to hear the difference between a down-leveled response and what a good response is that's not going to get you down-leveled. Do you think we can do that?
Let's do it.
All right, cool. Tell me about a time that you got buy-in from peers who were initially resistant to your idea.
Okay, so let me start with a down level response. In this case, let me talk about how I was able to get our sales team to support our computer vision product, which was something they were very initially reluctant to do. Okay, so for starters, we had our initial launch of the computer vision product at Unity. Actually got pretty good engagement, but our sales kickoff, and actually even some amount of like initial interest on the website and things like that. But that ultimately did not lead to any commercial transactions or commercial traction. And it turns out what happened was our sales leads didn't get it. And they basically took the perspective was, well, this is a new stage product. We really don't want to distract our teams. They're not really going to ask anyone to focus on this, even though you're getting leads and getting engagement. So my job was to fix this. And so as a result, I reached out to our sales leads. I walked them through our product, which he agreed to test and see if we could address this concern. And in the end, through a test and working with a couple of his people, we actually were able to land a few engagements. And then they started realizing this could be of value. And then they actually started selling the product, which is how we got off the ground and we were able to generate our first few transactions. Okay. So that would be the down level response. And when I give the good response, you'll sort of see the difference. Obviously, the good response, per my feedback initially, will be a little bit longer.
Okay.
So for this example, let me talk about how I was able to get our sales team to support our computer vision project, which was something they were initially very reluctant to do, right? So same thing as before, our initial launch went well, got good initial sales engagement, but didn't generate any commercial transactions or traction. And afterwards, we found out that the North American sales leader didn't get it, and he didn't believe in this product, and as a result, he was unwilling to ask any of his teams to focus on it. This was a hard thing for me to initially figure out, but we had to dig for it. So I was asked to step in and fix this. To start, I did a little homework before I talked to our sort of senior director. This involved talking to a few of the members of the sales team who I had previously worked with, and to get a sense of what happened, and then to understand what misconceptions that may have led to this scenario, despite the fact that our initial sales reaction and engagement was positive. And through these conversations, we found that there were two key issues. Number one, there was the perception that deal sizes were small. So as a result, why would I want to spend effort on this if the deal size is small? And at the time, Unity was putting a lot of focus around ARR, so annual recurring revenue. And because our initial transaction was a single transaction. They didn't see a path to ARR. And because there was no path to ARR, this is not something they were going to prioritize because it didn't help them meet their larger goals. This is what the misconceptions were. When you unpacked it a little bit more, the real issue was very clearly they were not technically comfortable selling the product, right? So what that meant is when I met with our senior director, I asked him what his concerns were. And he threw up a bunch of different issues. Some were real, some were a little exaggerated. But at its core, he did eventually come around to telling me his teams were not comfortable to selling this product because it was more technically complex than anything they did. And they now had to reach out to a new target consumer, which is sort of the ML engineer or the computer vision engineer. Mm-hmm. Obviously, this is a challenge, but I obviously said, okay, let's figure out a way to work together and make this work. And what he did was he said, okay, you know what? And he was pulling it all on me. He said, I need you to give me a single doc that explains everything. So I want to know what the problem is, who the target customer is, how we can find them, what it is worth, and what is our proposal to how we want to start this initiative, knowing that I won't believe you in the beginning anyway. He gave me 2 weeks and put everything in my cart. And so we did this. We put together a very concise doc. We explained everything why this was easy group to prospect against. Just because the sheer existence of computer vision engineer meant the company had the problem, which meant it was easy to find these people. Just looked on LinkedIn. If you see computer vision engineer, you see a couple of them, they got a problem. We explained what the bigger opportunity was. We explained basically any company that's going to spend millions of dollars to have computer vision engineers are going to spend millions of dollars to get data. And that was what we were essentially providing. We showed the path how we would get AR, and we already had a plan that finance had approved. And the other thing I did was I knew he wouldn't greenlight the whole team doing it. So I asked for a small step, which was, would you give me a small pod of mid-market sellers and who I can work with to refine the approach? It's a low-cost test. I have to be just as involved as you are to make this work. And if it works, we'll codify it and roll it out to broader teams. This was a low bar answer he agreed to, and we moved forward. Through this process, the net result of it all was essentially, I work with this team, we refined our material, we refined our pitch, and we refined our targeting. And at the end, this product was the highest converting product in terms of lead to qualified sales and qualified sales to conversion, right? Or qualified lead to lead to qualified lead and qualified lead to sale. So we had the highest conversion rate of anything except for the core product of Unity, which is the Unity commercial engine. And the other part was the sales team were actually really easy. They were really good at getting targets, and they became the person who sold it to the rest of the team and say, look, I can find targets like this. It takes me 10 minutes. They respond. And so really what ended up happening was they became our spokespeople. And through that process, we landed this and got this rolling out to the entire organization. Okay. So cutscene. Now, let me give you the quick key differences in the two answers. Yeah. Obviously, we see the length, right? So obviously both answers. Yeah. The second answer I gave comes with a lot more specifics, and it talks about the unique things that I did to push past these points instead of just generally saying we accomplished this. Yeah. In the feedback that when we were doing our mocks and when I talked to some of our interviews after the fact, this is a really key piece for helping them understand both the severity of the problem and especially when it comes to places like Meta, being able to work through the emotional objections is a key thing, and demonstrating that your ability to do that at both senior levels was a key part of all of this. And that was sort of like that was sort of the key nugget that I would want to call out for this specific answer.
I noticed that very much in the like non-down-leveled response that you gave, that I was taken on that journey with you. And I found myself thinking as you were giving the details of the problem, how would I solve this? That's tough to have such a senior level leader not believe in the product that you've already built. That's kind of distressing. So taking the interviewer with you on that journey and trying to get them to think about how big of a problem this actually is a great strategy to do that. Yeah. Okay, I'd like to try another question. Sure. So can you think of a previous project that you led where you had to change the objective or goals mid-project?
So let's start with the down-level response. So this situation involved us adjusting the goals for our robotics team. So initially, we had a team that had been focusing on developing solutions for multi-jointed robotic arms. So those like 6 joints robotic arms that you see from Universal Robotics, those types of things. And they're typically used in manufacturing. However, over the summer, my PM intern basically worked on a project and demonstrated that the AMR, so autonomous mobile robot segment, which is, think of the warehouse robots move around the warehouse and sort of see things, right? This segment was actually nearer term target customer segment that was better suited to take advantage of where our current solution was. And as a result, we, at a high level, decided to switch course. When I say at a high level, the SVP signed off on this and said, go ahead. But he then gave me the responsibility of working with the team to sort of make it happen. Mm-hmm. Right. So from there, we represented things to the sort of the senior manager who led the robotics team, and then basically presented again to the engineering folks. Had a few questions and concerns that we were able to talk to them about, but then we worked with them on sort of a somewhat thoughtful path forward that took into consideration of their concerns and allowed us to sort of get to a middle path in terms of landing this solution. Okay, that's the simple down level response. So the good response, we'll start with the basic tenors at the top, which is involved our robotics team. They had been focusing on robotic arms. We had a PM intern basically proved otherwise. So we'll start at the point of what happened when the SVP signed off on the project. Yeah. So from that point, once our SVP signed off on the research and agreed to adjust the target customers, we went through at that point 2 major epics in the plan, and then we separated all of the roadmap into sort of 2 groups, the existing roadmap. And the group number 1 is useful for both. So things that would be useful for the arms and useful for the AMRs, and then things that would be useful for the arms, but not for the AMRs, right? So very clearly segmenting their current backlog. And then from there, we open a bunch of discovery spikes to understand what would be uniquely required for the AMRs. So this is like, okay, so you're obviously working on robotic arms. Let's categorize this and let's figure out what else we need to do and how we would sort of fit that into the roadmap. Mm-hmm. Based on after doing this, we presented the initial plan to the engineering team, explain what drove the shift, and all of this work obviously was done with the senior manager. And then basically we ask them to say, okay, of the projects which we are now going to sort of deprioritize, which is useful for arms but not useful for AMRs, talk to us about what the smart or the intelligent stopping point would be. Meaning, we know we're going to pick this back up. So if you tell me working to this point makes sense now, and this is a good handoff point, versus if I cut you now, when we come back to this project, there's going to be 3x the amount of ramp up for you because you'll have lost context. Let's have those conversations now. So we did that, and that way we sort of set the stopping point for the rest of these pieces. And then from there, what this actually allowed us to do is, because we had worked with them along the way, we have actually integrated them to the process. They were felt included in the decision that was made. They actually went along. They were perfectly fine with the decision. The morale was preserved, which is actually a really key thing with engineering orgs, because they're very concerned about getting yanked and having their roadmaps just sort of changed on them without having participation. So we addressed those pieces. And then the other key part that was done, and this actually came to our benefit at the end, was the intern had actually interviewed all of them in preparation for her project in the very beginning. So they saw a lot of their feedback incorporated into her results and her findings. And that made them like, okay, we've been listened to. And that sort of was a key component. They felt listened to. And all of this led to good velocity, no impact on the engineering morale, and no impact on the actual team's delivery in terms of what they actually got to. And they actually got there a lot faster along the way because they were not fighting the decision, right? Yeah. So in terms of the difference between these 2 answers, the second answer really shows off the difference in terms of the amount of empathy and EQ. And it shows as a senior leader that you understand the plight of your engineering team and the people that you're going to be working with. And it shows that you went the extra mile proactively to sort of overcome these issues and build the bridges. Because the key thing whenever you're working with an engineering team is it's not getting there fast for the first thing. We're going on a long journey, and we need to be aligned the whole way. And if I don't build relationships now, this is only going to get harder. And that key differentiation and investment up front is, I think, a big difference that you'll see with senior folk, and does not come out at all in the first answer, which checks the box for saying how we did it. It does not check the box for all the things that we did that go above and beyond what a normal a junior engineer or junior TPM would potentially do. Yeah, that's absolutely right. I'd like to try one more before we wrap up. Is that cool? Sure. Yep. Okay.
Can you tell me about a time that you disagreed with your team or your manager, and how you handle that situation?
Okay, so we'll give the quick down level response and give context for this. So when I was working on our product, it was called a Unity simulation. My manager had made a very specific stance, which was we do not want to target people who are, it was called working on-prem. So basically the on-prem customer. So just for context, for technical differences, everything is in the cloud these days, especially when it comes to AI and simulation. There are a certain number of customers and who maintain a very large, think of it as private cloud. So on my on-prem environment, I actually have a scaled set of hardware and all my jobs run through there instead of running through AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud. Right. So he explicitly said our target customer is not going to be that private cloud or on-prem customer. He had good reasons for that. So in terms of the down level response, so we had this situation when we did our initial product launch. We got feedback from sales that said you really should consider this group. Well, he gave a reason why we didn't, and we just sort of moved on. So what we did through that process, we just started collecting additional information, and we got some number of folks who were interested in the product. And we eventually, once we hit a certain level, we floated it up to them and said, hey, look, we've gotten this feedback from sales. Would you allow us to run a test? And I said, okay, great. So we ran a test. We got in a few customers, and we then showed what we could do with this product in this environment. We also learned a few things. And in that moment, he then said he'd let us open the aperture to basically talk about that second project, that on-prem customer as an additional target. Okay, so that's the very simple down-level response. The actual a good response, which shows actually a little bit more of the point that my manager had taken initially. So the initial point of view was everything we said was true in terms of what his perspective of not going to the on-prem customer. And I knew this is a very hard line in this end, and he actually had very good professional experience for saying why this is a really, really bad idea, which meant overcoming this was going to be a huge issue. And so one of my managers in the past said, when you get in a room, only one person is allowed to have an opinion. That person's title usually starts with a VP. Everybody else had better bring a lot of data. So I started a process of gathering that data. So whenever we got customers coming in who were interested in the product, but mentioned that they were on-prem, I saved that response. I actually would have a conversation with them to size the opportunity, even though I knew I couldn't take it. So that once I got to a certain number of them, we actually got one where it was really pressing, where we could actually lose the account as a result of it. So I walked into my boss with our SVP of sales at that point and said, hey, look, we need to do this. Otherwise, we risk losing this account, even though it's not a large dollar opportunity. And I explained to him how we would manage this, how we would basically de-risk everything else, and how they would sign off on all the key pieces associated with it. In order to get to market in time and overcome his biggest objection, I had to get the sales lead and him to agree that we would do this without any security, meaning there's nothing, we were basically enforced through contract, not through technical disablement of product in case something went wrong or if they violated the terms of use. Mm-hmm. He signed off on that. We brought in one deal. Based on that, I went back to the list and immediately pitched the remaining customers, which was like 6 or 7 of them. Of the 6, 5 agreed immediately. And when I talked to each one of them, I raised the price like 20, 30, 40% to see what the stress point of view was. And in every instance, they agreed. And so every time I brought him one of these things, I told him, I'm increasing my per seat license. I'm increasing my per seat license. I'm increasing my per seat license. And then by the end of it, when we had gotten to like over $500,000 in ARR, he was like, okay, you clearly have something here. I realized I was not correct in my initial solution. Go ahead and productize this. And we began working with our simulation team to build in the controls and build in all the security that essentially would enable this to work and not force us to use lawyers to enforce the terms of use.
Yeah.
The key difference with this situation was explaining the magnitude of the hill I had to climb and the detail of how we went and got those additional customers. And this is an element of a little bit of, I took a gamble and took a risk because I had to be willing to put myself out there and then find a way to overcome his objections at each stage. So I had to overcome the first objection of how you sell what we have. I don't want to give any more resources to it. And we could do that. And then the second thing was, is there really an opportunity here? By bringing him in very quick order, like contract, it was very difficult for him to refute at that moment.
Yeah.
And that became the way that we overcame the objection. And then this is a good example of doing a really hard thing, which is you have to hold to your gut and not just fall over because your leader says to do something, but then also being respectful and thoughtful of managing the process in a way that acknowledges his perspective is always informed.
Yeah.
But you're going to show them why this is different. And I think this was a key part of this response and a key part of why this was a good response to give in sort of an up-leveled situation.
Thank you so much, Kevin. This is extremely valuable. I don't think I've seen a comparison like this in any other interview prep material before. And I'm sure that this is going to be very valuable for the people watching at home. Are there any closing remarks that you want to make?
I think that the number one thing I'll tell people, and I got a lot of value out of Exponent, is you should just, when you go through the process and you go through Exponent, you'll find people like yourself and keep them as your mock partners and just keep going back to them. Because what you'll find over time, and this is something, the first interview with them is tends to be pretty good. And you're like, well, I have a good rapport with this individual. But as you get more comfortable, the feedback actually gets better. And a lot of the feedback and a lot of the insights I got around how to level and not level appropriately came on like the 5th or 6th time I talked to somebody. And this sounds like a lot. And I think people always they look at it and they go, oh my God, like how many mock interviews do I have to do? I don't have that much time. When it comes to down leveling, if I'm telling you the answer is 50 to 100,000, in many cases, if at higher level, it's going to be 250,000, 400,000.
Yeah.
How are you going to spend even 20 hours that can give you that disproportionate level of return? So I think it's always worth the investment, and people just need to understand this is what you have to do. And I think that's the hard part, is a lot of prep courses will tell you this, answer the question, this is how to answer it, but they won't tell you the degree to answer it. I think this is one of the key things I found.
Yeah, absolutely. Maintaining relationships with people that you mock interview with is extremely valuable and important. I can tell you how many people when I was going through the process of trying to figure out that transition from Eng to PM, a lot of the work that I had to do to get to the interview in the first place was just talking to people, networking, trying to get people who would help me with mock interviews inside and outside the company. And those relationships were crucial when it actually came to, hey, I have the interview now. I've already done a bunch of mock interviews with you. Can you give me just like one more? Because I want to work on XYZ issue. And if you tell them also what issues you feel like you're struggling with, I think a lot of mock interviewers who are attuned to your style and know what your work is like will be able to help you really debug what's going on in your answers.
All right. So one more thing. I think you mentioned the comment about asking for help genuinely. I would tell you, people in this space respond. If you ask for help genuinely and earnestly, and you're respectful for people's time, I have never seen a situation where someone said no. And I can tell you from myself, if you reach out to me on LinkedIn or other places, I would never say no. And the biggest reason for that is most of us realize we're pretty fortunate. And many of us have a situation where if you look back at your life, there's many different career points that you've had. You always realize that there was probably 1 or 2 moments where someone likely did something that they didn't have to, that dramatically changed the impact or influence of your current situation. And you don't know what happened, why they did it, but you're incredibly thankful for that. And as a result, I think people, because they understand that, there's always going to be a willingness to help someone who is asking in earnesty and needs help. And I think we all generally want to be. I think this is a lot of the Exponent mock folks. They're good people. They're smart people. They're interesting people. And these are actually people you want to know and interact with. And as a result, if you ask for help, they will give it. And vice versa. Please, if they ask you for help, return the favor and pay it forward and give it to them as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a brilliant thing to take away from this interview. If someone is asking you for help today or sometime down the line, think about this. Remember all the people that you asked for help with during your preparation and just pay it back, pay it forward. Thank you so much, Kevin. Really appreciate all your time and the fantastic comparisons of the answers that you gave. Thanks everyone watching at home, and good luck with all your interviews.